The RAWAH Wilderness is in the Medicine Bow National Forest. It was designated a wilderness area because it has a very important ecosystem. It provides clean air, water, and habitat for many endangered plants and animals. Tribes such as the Northern Arapaho, Northern Cheyenne, Lakota, Ute, and Eastern Shoshone inhabited the area and used it as a travel route. The tribes used to come to the area to make weapons because the trees in the area were particularly good for making bows, and they also used to hold ceremonies to cure diseases. The RAWAH Wilderness was designated by the Wilderness Act of 1964 as one of the first 5 wildernesses. It was not contested, and 27,000 acres were first set aside, and it was expanded by another 50,000 acres in 1980 with the passage of the Colorado Wilderness Act. Only a few ranchers were forced to move from the area. Native Americans were evicted about 100 years earlier by the Treaty of Fort Laramie, where tribes were forced to move out and were given territories in locations throughout the West. Stakeholders of this area include the Forest Service, Coloradans, and hunters, as it is a very popular hunting area.
There are many direct threats affecting the RAWAH Wilderness. Recreation and overuse is definitely among them. Camping, hiking, horseback riding, hunting, and fishing are just a handful of available activities for visitors to the RAWAH Wilderness to choose from. Another direct threat that the RAWAH Wilderness faces is the introduction of invasive species. Since the 1970s, moose and a variety of fish species have been introduced into the area, which has changed the ecosystem. Likewise, wildfires have also become a threat. In this region, they are often caused by campers who neglect to put out fires properly. Furthermore, water projects such as ditch routing pose yet another threat to the RAWAH Wilderness. The RAWAH Ditch was created in the early 1900s to divert water from the Laramie River to eastern Colorado. However, this ditch has been known to be poorly maintained. The diversion itself has also disrupted the natural flow of water and causes erosion of mountainsides and valleys in the area. An additional threat to focus on in the RAWAH Wilderness is habitat loss and degradation. First off, there are many underlying causes that influence it. RAWAH is an extremely desirable place to visit because of its vast beauty and endless options for recreation. These things would make anybody want to stay here. In fact, there has been an increase in construction, especially for home building in this area, which has contributed to the loss of valley bottoms and hillsides. Another noteworthy underlying cause is community attitudes and values. Most Colorado natives and RAWAH locals value their skiing and mountain town culture. However, ski resort expansion is booming because of these ideals. Sawmill Creek is located in the RAWAH Wilderness as well as the Medicine Bow mountain range. This area is highly trafficked for ski mountaineering. Here, people climb up and ski down multiple peaks to create new ski trails. But these activities are extremely devastating to the fragile landscape. On the other hand, knowledge and education deficiencies should also be recognized as an underlying cause to habitat loss and degradation. Visitors are often unaware of their impact on the environment and need to be better educated on leave no trace principles in order to enjoy the RAWAH Wilderness sustainably. Indirect threats affecting habitat loss and degradation include climate change, increases of nearby settlements, and changes in the ecosystem or food chain. According to the World Wildlife Foundation, fire, avalanches, and wind are all major disturbance patterns in this ecoregion. Prevailing winds can alter the distribution and morphology of tree species at higher elevations, as well as distribute pollution from the Denver metropolitan area into the RAWAH Wilderness. Increases of nearby settlements indirectly affect RAWAH because it drives people closer to the area and opens up more opportunities to recreate there. The introduction of moose has also indirectly affected RAWAH's ecosystem and food chain. According to Colorado Parks and Wildlife, historical records dating back to the 1850s indicate that moose wandered into northern Colorado from Wyoming, but were transient and never established a stable breeding population. So in 1978, state wildlife experts transplanted 24 male and female moose from Wyoming and Utah to create a breeding population here in Colorado. As the population grew, the ecosystem and food chain was altered because vegetation that moose like to feed on grew sparse. It was also noticed that moose had to compete with sheep and cattle over grazing areas. However, these changes were overlooked because the project succeeded in creating new hunting opportunities and a popular wildlife viewing option. History has also influenced habitat loss and degradation in the RAWAH wilderness when Native American populations started to settle in the area and utilize its resources. To the Ute tribe, the word RAWAH meant wilderness, and medicine bow referred to the belief that wood collected from this area to build bows was blessed by the gods.
The use of wilderness areas like the RAWAHs has increased 10 times over the past 40 years. Due to that, the area can lose that feeling of being a wilderness. To reduce impacts from people, the park is set up to handle different groups of people at different times. There are specific hunting seasons to limit their impact as well, and periods where livestock can be used. Similar strategies are used to control where people are in the park by monitoring where campsites can be made and only allowing stoves or fire rings to be used. This is especially prevalent in areas like Blue Lake, Hang Lake, and other alpine zones. Restrictions like this succeed in controlling the type of use and how many people are present, reducing human impact. Fire suppression is an issue for many wilderness sites because controlled burns are frowned upon on public lands. This stems from policies in the early 1900s where the community found fires undesirable on public lands. In recent years, there have been pushes for prescribed burns in wilderness areas, but because of their status, there have been no plans for controlled burns. To prevent out-of-control fires in this delicate system, there are regulations in place that restrict placement of fires, as well as if fires can even be used. If conditions are unfavorable and dangerous, the park can restrict fires completely. This is still a threat to the park because large-scale burns can't be done to remove fuel, but the park can manage for the use of personal fires to further protect the area. Water projects like ditch routing can be used to direct water to people outside of the wilderness area, much like in the case of the old RAWAH ditch. Poorly maintained ditches can spell disaster for the aquatic ecosystem, and siltation can change the topography of a stream completely, driving many species away. The ditch is an active structure being used, but is not maintained by the owner. Ditches easily wash out and become larger and larger with more and more water. The RAWAHs are considered a critical water resource in Colorado, so permits have been submitted to allow for watershed management in the areas, including lakes, reservoirs, wetlands, and stream areas within the park. Plans include bank stabilization to further prevent the ditch from worsening and still allowing it to serve its original function. Invasive species are difficult to manage for in parks across the nation. The RAWAHs only allow weed-free feed and forage at its park and encourages the use of local firewood to reduce encounters with invasive beetle populations. There are species who have been introduced, but their presence generates more money for the region and are generally seen in a positive light. For the park specifically, species like the rainbow trout, brown trout, brook trout, tiger trout, and even moose are all introduced, and each has changed the landscape over time in the region. Trout are an example where they are managing for the more fragile native cutthroat populations, so they stalk non-natives to reduce pressure on them in the most populated areas. This has proven successful, and there are breeding cutthroat populations in the region. Pollution is seemingly inevitable with human recreation. Leave no trace initiatives are encouraged throughout the park, and restrictions are placed on large groups. People are managed well in the park, but the greater concern is with livestock. Wilderness areas have high water quality, and the RAWAHs maintain that by restricting livestock by their water sources in other riparian areas. They can't be hobbled, tethered, or picketed within 200 feet of lakes, streams, or trails. This reduces the introduction of E. coli in the water and trail degradation due to browsing from livestock. Regulations like this have reduced stream damage and helped maintain a high water quality.
One management principle that applies to RAWAH is that protected managers need to intervene so that the impacts of human-caused threat processes are reduced. Overuse is a direct threat to the RAWAH area, and it is something that can be contained because humans are causing this threat. This principle is important to the threat at hand because the overuse and recreation of the wilderness is increasing and affecting vegetation as people walk on trails every day. Another management principle that applies to RAWAH is effective environmental planning processes are necessary to combat to RAWAH wilderness because the use of fires affect the environment directly. This happens when people are not putting out fires properly, and it can cause wildfires to occur. This principle is important because if we can teach campers how to set up and put out a fire properly, we can reduce the environmental impact. Finally, providing effective community education will help the threat of habitat loss and degradation. Education about RAWAH is important because it not only shows facts, but it teaches people what affects the environment and how to take care of it. Leave No Trace is a program that also provides education to further protect the wilderness.